Come with me, O outstretched spirits, O saints of days past, where memories grow and fires dance. Dance and fly, O fairies, the golden glow of memories that you carry grows. Something wicked, something fair. Halloween is once again in the air. I'm in Belgium again, continuing my studies, and this time I'm here for a fall semester. And this unfortunately means that I won't be home with my girlfriend or my family for several of my favorite parts of the year, including my birthday, Thanksgiving, and Halloween. I've talked many times about the fact that fall is my favorite time of year, from the weather, to the leaves, to the media we enjoy, and the holidays. It's one of my favorite things about the cultural practices we've still carried over, and that sense of magic we build up carries over into the winter with holidays like Christmas and Hanukkah, which have such warmth and cultural significance. It turns the end of the year into one of the only times when it really feels like we have a collective culture in America, at least. And nothing to me feels like this quite as much as Halloween. So, in another attempt to write something that isn't just yapping about movies and video games I like, this time we will be looking at Halloween, why I think it's the perfect communal holiday and carries with it several aspects of life that mostly get forgotten and lost in American culture. We'll accomplish this by examining the brief history of Halloween, including its religious origins and modern celebrations in America, and compare it with other similar holidays celebrated. We will then explore how these principles are reflected in contemporary media, and we will conclude by discussing how these themes and principles of the holiday make it so special to me, and why I think the growth of Halloween and other holidays is so important for us as a people, especially as things become increasingly interesting in the world. I'm no historian, but I am a student of religion, so looking into the origins of Halloween is something that is partially in my field of knowledge, as Halloween is objectively a religious holiday. But there is some debate as to what religion predominantly, and if it should still be considered a religious holiday in its current form. It is widely agreed by most scholars that Halloween derives from kind of three-ish holidays from Celtic pagans and the Roman Catholic Church who conquered them. The first we will look at is the older root, the Celtic pagan holiday of Samhain. Samhain, the November time celebration of changing from the lighter half of the year to the darker half, is a very complex tradition and marks a time of in-between as its main feature. As historian Hilary Smith points out, in-between or liminal spaces are a key aspect of all Celtic paganism. Many of the stories and tales focus on spaces where spirits and humans would meet that aren't quite either of their worlds. Even the spiritual world for the Celtics, called the other world, is a place whose key aspect is that it's just out of reach of human understanding or knowledge, but not so far out of reach that it cannot be seen. It was this in-between, and it was during Samhain that the other world and the gods and fairies and other spirits from the other world would be closest to the human world. Not much is historically known about Samhain, or really a lot of Celtic mythology, because of the mass cultural destruction led by the Catholic Church, which we'll talk about in a second. But we do know a couple things about Samhain by reading accounts and looking at historical landmarks. Perhaps the most famous practice of the festival was the lighting of great bonfires. Some claim this directly inspired the modern-day practices of jack-o'-lanterns, but there's some debate about this having to do with some Catholic stuff we'll look at later. There was also usually a great feast, and it was generally thought to be a time of peace between a lot of the Celtic countries because the spirits were too close to risk anything like petty human fighting that would annoy them. Timeline-wise, we need to jump forward to perhaps the most important event for moving Samhain towards modern-day Halloween, and that, of course, is unfortunately the Catholic Church. Ireland got hit with Christianity very early on in the Christian lifespan. Historians aren't exactly sure when, as both famous figures who brought Christianity to Ireland, St. Patrick and Palladius, reported that Christians were already present in some extent in the island. This suggests that Christianity arrived sometime before the 400s. But once the Catholic Church fully turned its eyes to the rainy hills of Ireland and other regions where Celtic paganism was widespread, shit hit the fan pretty fast, and it did not go well for the Celtic people or their culture. The church more or less forcibly consumed the Celtic people, as it did anywhere it went more or less, destroying their religious texts and monuments and a lot of their people's written history, and forcing people to convert to Christianity to some extent. To prevent these people from protesting too much and to kind of keep common peace, it was a common practice of the church at this time to incorporate many cultural practices and celebrations into pre-existing Catholic ones, allowing people to continue celebrating and preserving some aspects of their culture. To be more accurate on how this went down, just because I like being petty, Christianity at the time as it first came to them was relatively peaceful, and the Celtic Christians were actually an incredibly interesting movement, and their monastic movement especially, or rather their monks and their monasteries, are some of the most interesting and peaceful instances of Christianity you'll find in their early spread across the world. But the Roman Catholic Church did not even like these Celtic churches in the way they differed from Roman Catholicism. These early Celtic Catholics were very influenced by the theology of Pelagius, who you don't really need to know much about for this video, other than the fact that his theology differed from Augustine theology, which was a big no-no, and he soon got kicked out of the church. This led to several violent conflicts and synods, like the Synod of Whitby in 664 AD, which pretty much was a big haha we won for the Roman Catholics towards the Celtic Catholics, removing their authority and forming the official date for Easter, which itself had become one of these half-and-half holidays, adopting a lot of pagan ideas into the celebration of Jesus' resurrection. But all this Catholic craziness happening in Ireland also coincided with Catholic development of All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, and All Hallows' Eve, which is actually thought to have originated maybe with the Spanish people, and you can see this heavily influencing their Day of the Dead in Mexico, which also has its own indigenous origins tied to before Christianity, which makes all this history incredibly complex and interesting to see develop over so many different cultures. And these three celebrations, all over just a couple days, became known as Hallowtide in English, or All Hallowtide. This was a holiday to acknowledge that the souls of the saints did in fact go to the afterlife, and were there to celebrate them, and All Souls' Day took place at night as a celebration and acknowledgement of the souls who had passed through and were in purgatory, waiting for Judgment Day, a time to pray for them, for the forgiveness of their sins, and to ward off evil spirits that might be free at the time, which if you notice, sounds remarkably similar to Samhain, despite developing in completely different places at different times, even down to connecting with some spiritual presence in the in-between. For the Celtics, the otherworld; for the Christians, purgatory. Now, if I was going Ancient Aliens, I could do a whole thing about this, but I'm not. Instead of bonfires, Christians would ring bells, and in some countries, influenced by Mexico and Spain, people would leave offerings of food out for the spirits of their loved ones. And so, as the marches of colonialism raged on all over the world, and as All Hallowtide was sometimes practiced on November 1st, they were adopted into the festival of Samhain. And while Hallowtide itself mostly died out due to the Reformation, moving away from a lot of celebrations that the Catholic Church had, and leading eventually to the development of a completely different denomination, the holiday, soon to be known as Halloween, lived on, if not outright celebrated by the Church anymore. It had made its way across most of the Western world as a day where people believed either fairies or gods or souls or saints would just be a little bit closer to the human world than normal. Halloween was no more pagan than it was Christian in this instance, and took influences from so many different cultures. It became a time for people to come together, to remember the dead, to pray, to eat, to drink, to light fires, even to do spells, and to be together as a people, to be a culture together, all under the influence that death comes for everyone. Though notably, there is no historical evidence that Samhain itself had anything to do with the dead, just the spiritual realm, despite pop culture kind of really leaning into the fact that Samhain is supposed to be some kind of celebration of the dead, or of some kind of god of death, or had human sacrifices. There really just isn't much known about that, and a lot of that information is from early Christian sources trying to talk about how demonic Samhain was, so kind of unreliable sources. But this takes us all the way forward to Puritans and America, which Puritans kind of founded modern America, and they hated church holidays. They hated Halloween, yes, but they also hated Christmas, they hated Easter, they hated pretty much anything that had to do with Mass because they hated Mass and they hated the Catholic Church and their rules. It wasn't until the late 1800s and early 1900s that Halloween started to make a comeback in America via Canada and immigration. Canada actually brought over Halloween when it was colonized, and Irish immigrants who came to places like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston brought this culture with them as well, hence why so much of American Halloween visuals and aesthetics are paired with that New England charm. And they couldn't keep Halloween out of the States, despite conservatives even today thinking that the holiday is for evil, despite now holding the beliefs of other banned holidays like Christmas and Easter. Halloween would yet again become a holiday of the people. Known early on in America for its parties and its wild tricks and pranks that young people would drunkenly do either for fun or particularly trying to be anti-conservative when it came to how people were towards Irish immigrants and the current feel within American culture. Traditions like dressing up are thought to have even come from All Hallows Eve, where people would wear masks so that spirits wouldn't recognize them, and the rest was history. It's not hard to see the development of the rest of the traditions. There was a large struggle to try and get Halloween as more of a tame holiday with less vandalism and violence, and part of this would be where we get the modern mythologizing of it. By making it more a popularly celebrated holiday, you could enforce the idea of what it could actually look like, and trick-or-treating becomes kind of a tame version of these Halloween pranks, and the candy becomes kind of a replacement for the food left out for souls or shared together in feasts, the costumes for the masks. Halloween in America, as all things do in America, went commercial. Now we'll be moving out of the realm of history and focusing more on what specifically I wanted to talk about with this video. Why does Halloween feel so unique to me? Well, you might be thinking to yourself, well, all holidays feel pretty unique. Christmas doesn't feel like Halloween, which doesn't feel like Valentine's Day, which doesn't feel like Groundhog Day or something. But this isn't exactly what I mean. It's not that Halloween stands out just for its difference in aesthetic or practices from other American holidays. It's the way that it's practiced that affects and is viewed by people differently than pretty much any other holiday. It's a very communal holiday, for kids especially, but even for adults. And while other holidays like Thanksgiving or Easter may bring communities together through churches or family, Halloween is one that doesn't inherently reflect either of these. Usually it even goes directly against them, as most churches today do not celebrate any form of Halloween, some even denouncing it as a satanic holiday. And Halloween is traditionally celebrated with the kids of your neighborhood or friends and acquaintances at a party or club, not exactly family. And what separates it as such isn't its intense paganism or witchcraft. And I know I didn't touch on witchcraft much, but essentially, since a bunch of different cultures saw the transition between summer and autumn as like this big spiritually open time, occult practices were done a lot on Halloween, but the claim is kind of shaky, especially because the lack of study, but also because witchcraft has always been kind of sensationalized, especially by predominantly Christian communities, especially for how widespread it is. Even today, Wicca, the most popular form of witchcraft paganism in America, only accounts for about 0.4% of the population in the US. So the amount of actual pagan rituals done on this day versus people just following Halloween traditions of doing evil things like killing black cats, which in itself is more of an urban myth and not something statistically proven to be happening. You can kind of see how this comes together into not really being relevant to the discussion. It's just kind of a conservative red flag thing that's popped up over time, though obviously a lot of people who practice witchcraft still do stuff on the actual day. Anyway, jeez. Sorry, that's so loud. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, what separates it as such isn't its intense paganism or witchcraft making all your family members and churches not want to celebrate the holiday. Halloween is most widely celebrated in the US by families with young kids, and it's that separates it. It creates spaces for the youth. It is kind of particularly a young person's holiday in the US, whereas most holidays aren't. Even early on, as I mentioned, when it got to the US, Halloween was a holiday of an oppressed people, passed on mostly by young people from all classes, where they would get to have fun, pull pranks, and have their own spaces. We can see the idea of Halloween being for young people reflected in almost every major piece of Halloween media. We could look at something like Coraline, arguably one of the most popular pieces of Halloween media, which I myself claimed, and maybe still claim as my favorite Halloween movie, reflects this idea perfectly. The film follows Coraline, a young girl who moves to a new house in the middle of nowhere with her unhappy parents. The house is boring and gross, the neighbors are weird and old, her parents ignore her. But then everything changes when she finds a portal in the house to the other world. Sound familiar? Where everything seems exciting and curated for Coraline. Now this becomes the central evil of the movie, as the other world is soon shown to be a trap by the other mother to take Coraline's eyes and soul, but we can see the exact principles I'm talking about. It centers around this exact problem of a young person not having their own space, or feeling like there's no space in the world for her. But this doesn't just go for young children, as one of the main leads of Halloween movies are teenagers and young adults, and a lot of it centers around sex. Looking at Halloween, the movie, and even Friday the 13th, we see the movies preoccupied with the fact that young people don't have space to be young and dumb and to have sex. And this is only becoming more of a problem in the modern era as teens and young adult spaces are being taken away more and more, or paywalled, or being more heavily monitored. Even if you and your friends are going to have like a walk in the park late at night, there's a good chance you'll get stopped by a security guard and kicked out. As the incredible YouTube channel PhilosophyTube mentioned in their episode on 15-minute cities, this lack of free, non-monitored public space, as well as growing tension around economic and health stability for young people, is a huge contributor to why young people have been having so little sex statistically lately. Why nightlife is dying, and why LGBTQ+ communities are having a harder time establishing themselves outside of places that already have a strong history for them. Young people's spaces are being invaded and attacked, and this has been happening for decades, which we can see reflected in movies like Friday the 13th, where the conservative mother, Mrs. Voorhees, goes on a killing spree of teenagers for having sex, drinking, and doing drugs. Again and again, these are the themes of some of the most defining movies of the season. Scream is an interesting one for this, as it's distinctly about the new generation of the 90s, which to some people felt completely unknowable. Billy and Stu, for better or worse, reflect a young gay couple killing for almost no reason at all. They're tired with the world not letting them make a name for themselves, or in Stu's position, just going along with it because Billy. And while Halloween movies and horror movies in general go in a lot of different directions, especially more supernatural ones, which often more focus on the religious oppression side of things, both demonic oppression, social oppression, and religious oppression, even modern movies in this vein, like the very underrated The First Omen, adapts the story of church corruption into one about a young woman's bodily autonomy and really life being stripped away from her. There's no space for her to exist. I could sit here all day going through examples of this trend in Halloween-centric media. Even in Over the Garden Wall, the closest thing I could consider my claim to fame, other than that time I was interviewed on the news about a birthday party place, Over the Garden Wall is about kids being lost in the unknown, a kind of purgatory, an in-between world for spirits, and between life and death, who have to try and find a way home by working out their relationship with each other, and for Wirt, the older brother, learning the confidence to take up space in the world and exist as a flawed child. These pieces of media aren't just reflections of the spirit of American Halloween, they also themselves are large influences on the practices and traditions of young people today. Why do we hold Halloween parties? Well, because they did it in the 2004 masterpiece Mean Girls. It's just what you do at this time of year, and it makes this looping Ouroboros of a thematic through line of the holiday in America. From Scooby-Doo to neighborhood trick-or-treating, the American context of Halloween sets it apart from any other holiday because it's one which allows kids of all ages, and young adults, a time where they rule the night. Not the spirits of the damned, but a class of people who are increasingly finding it harder to live, harder to move out, harder to exist away from the developmental harms of social media and AI, harder to have fun, harder to have sex, harder to not be under surveillance by the state or even their parents. Halloween is a time where we can roam the streets. This makes Halloween a truly magical holiday in my experience in America, and is one I wouldn't trade for anything else. Halloween has a multi-layered and multicultural history that doesn't just extend to any one root. As I said, it's no more pagan than it is Christian, and in the modern American context, it's no more religious than it is secular. But despite all of this, in modern-day America, the holiday stands out because it gives a space for young people, from little kids getting to dress up however they want and have candy and be with their community, to teenagers playing around with expression and being dumb teens, to even young adults who get to experiment with friends and try new things. It's one where even the media, which can range from cozy and warm to spooky and downright graphic, reflects the spirit of freedom for young people, and the fact that young people are constantly under some form of control, and that maybe the people who normally don't have a place in society have a place, at least for one spooky night. All in all, is Halloween that intense of a holiday? No, not really. But these things really do make it stand out for how special of a time it feels, especially when you're younger, and how it really makes you feel attached to your community and your friends and the actual locations in a cozy way that a lot of other holidays don't. And other holidays can be hard for people who aren't religious or people who don't have family to go home to, like Christmas and Thanksgiving. I'm currently in Belgium, and I really miss American Halloween. There's definitely Halloween being celebrated here, but it has nowhere near the same cultural context as American Halloween. And being here studying religion, not that many people on campus that I'm around really want to have anything to do with it, as the religious circles around here, especially the predominantly Catholic ones, which Catholicism is way more popular here than it is in the US, sees Halloween as kind of an evil holiday where witchcraft is practiced. So yeah, I just wanted to write a video to vent on why I find Halloween so special while I'm missing all my traditions with my friends and my girlfriend and my family, as well as my increasing worry about young people having spaces. I felt like I always longed as a kid and as a teen for spaces when I was younger. Ones where you could just hang out and not be under some kind of guard and not have to spend money. And it seems like this problem is getting worse and worse with the increased focus on security and capitalism, to the point where even houses are surveilled by parents that could know every single time you opened the door. It makes me really sad and in some instances mad. I don't know if there's any personal takeaway from this video outside of just why Halloween is special to me, but I guess if there is one, make sure you spend some time enjoying the holidays. Watch some spooky movies with friends, go to a party, or go for a late night walk. And for parents, if there are any who watch this channel, try and make sure your kids have room to breathe outside and inside the house, but especially offline. Make sure they have places to hang out with their friends without that just being social media where they don't feel like they're being watched 24/7. It's good for them, I promise, as I'm definitely a parental expert. But yeah, happy Halloween, everyone. I love you all, and have a spooky night. I just want you guys to appreciate my Silent Hill earrings. I bet you guys didn't see them very well, but Silent Hill rocks. A great Halloween game. I suggest it.